Welcome everybody, it's Go Local Live Friday edition, lunchtime. Lots of chaos in the world. I'm Josh Fenton, co-founder and CEO. With me is Bob Whitcomb.
Hello there.
Hello, sir. How are you?
And we'll see what we can do to spawn some more chaos.
Absolutely. Market's
That's right.
down, last look at 2.7%. We've got a correction of about 12%. Let's just start at the markets. Is this also just a natural correction, some profit taking?
I think so. I think there were I think there were underlying issues. The problems in manufacturing, world trade declining. And even though former Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke used to say recoveries are never, they never die of old age, they have to be murdered, I think there is something of the old age. The cycle, there are business cycles. Every time we have a long recovery, they say, well, we've abolished the business cycle. I remember back in the 60s, Walter Heller, who was the the chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, said, we've fixed it. We've learned how to manipulate the economy. Keynesian thing, and of course, we know where that ended.
We said it, people said it during Clinton's presidency.
That's right. The new moderation. The new moderation.
Before the dot-com boom, bubble.
The other issue, federal debt. Federal debt, which some people say, the people follow modern monetary theory, say that isn't important. It is important. There's no doubt about that. Corporate debt's very high. And a lot of this borrowing for corporate debt was to do stupid things like buybacks.
Yeah.
So, and also credit card delinquencies are rising at a pretty good clip. So,
coronavirus is now I think global health officials now call it a pandemic. It's hit all across the world except for Antarctica. It's hit all the continents. It is spreading very quickly in some instances. In the United States, we now have our first instance of an untrackable
there are other issues too, such as someone showing up with the coronavirus, being treated, the virus goes away, and then people are coming, they've got it back again.
Right.
Usually if you get a virus like that, you've got immunity for a while. Right. So we don't know that much about how this thing is mutating. Right. Viruses are very, very difficult to trace as they change over time. The other thing is where all this started in China, in the wet market in Wuhan, in that province, we don't know how much of their numbers to believe. I mean, it's an authoritarian regime. We don't know how much they're cooking the numbers. Are they understating the numbers? What's the real? Are we getting a full epidemiological explanation from the Chinese? I doubt it, because of course they're terrified of the economic effects of this. The ever-growing Chinese economy has been essential to maintaining political stability there.
Right. Listen, Kate Nagel had Professor Kate Mason on from Brown University, an anthropologist who was very involved in tracking SARS years ago. And she said, listen, you shouldn't believe the Chinese numbers. She said straight out, it's not in their nature as a society to give out that information. So we don't know necessarily what the real death toll may be, what the number that may be impacted. We did get a glimpse of how deadly it can be when it hit Italy like that.
That's right.
100 to 300 people to thousands, and dozens dying very, very quickly.
In the economic heart of Italy, we should say that northern Italy is where the economy is based. That makes Italy is the third biggest country economically in Europe, and probably nationally, I should have looked it up before I came over here, 9th, 10th, something like that, major economy. It will certainly have effects here in supply chains.
I actually got forwarded to me a Facebook posting from a hotelier in Positano, Italy, saying, don't worry, continue to book, they must see almost instantaneously adverse impact.
Oh, huge, travel cancellations, And people are afraid, even if they aren't that afraid of the disease per se, they're afraid they'll be trapped.
I think that's the
airline cancellations, so they'll be quarantined. Maybe they'll be quarantined for no particularly good reason, but then they'll be trapped for 2 weeks. So it's a real issue. Certainly, the supply chain issues with China are more important, especially in the American tech industry, where so much of that stuff is actually made over there.
Absolutely.
The R&D tends to be here, the manufacturing there.
So we get a package from Amazon every day virtually, as you've been here, with some plastic cord or piece of component that we need from a technology standpoint. Let's jump over. We've done a series this week on the golf industry here in Rhode Island. A couple of years ago, Kate Nagel broke a story about Agawam Hunt Club, sort of this pristine, great legacy club.
Very waspy, used to be famously anti-Semitic.
Right. And Carnegie Abbey, which was this incredible creation.
Promoted to jet setters. Basically.
$200,000 initiation fee.
And it was basically they were marketing to the same people they were marketing on the French Riviera.
Literally. And then now this week, what initially looked like one thing and is now morphed into another over at Metacomet, in the golf world, a Donald Ross course is legendary.
We should tell that Donald Ross was a Scotsman, and he was considered the state of the art.
I think the most analogy,
grand.
It's a Frank Lloyd Wright.
Absolutely, and that kind of artistry is he's basically Ross was a landscape architect. Right.
So a group of investors invest in the club just a year ago,
including Brad Faxon,
including PGA, arguably Rhode Island's, one of its greatest professional golfers, won 8 times on the PGA Tour, and that group invests $2.2 or $2.3 million to acquire the club. They make promises that they're going to invest millions.
That's right. They're going to fix up the clubhouse and all that stuff.
And they're going to spend 1.5 in their first year. Brad Faxon's going to be personally involved with this. And lo and behold, within just a year, they're flipping this property over to Marshall Development, a major development company in New England, located here in Rhode Island. And they're going to develop the property into retail and
residential. I mean, there's some questions. Will some of it, for example, be a gated community? I wouldn't be surprised. Multi-unit gated community. I in my column kind of half jokingly suggest to maybe go to a 9-hole or a 3-hole or maybe a putting green. But that's got to be extremely attractive. 105 acres, other than some ornamental trees, open.
And
I mean, really easy to build stuff on. Spectacular location. You're looking across the head of the bay. It's this funny combination of rural and urban. Very unusual. Easy access. So when they like, what happens to the clubhouse and all this? Would this be a community center? I don't know.
We have no idea on what the plans are.
This speaks to the general decline of golf. I think even the sort of rich people used to play it all the time. They don't want to spend as much time. 18 holes, 4 or 5 hours. And the lunching around it, the drinking and all that's declined a lot. And for other people, for middle class people, it's just too damned expensive. A little like skiing. Skiing's seen some declines because it's so expensive. The equipment, the greens fees, and all that. So it's not, I don't see a lot of growth.
The backlash we've been getting, especially off today's article, which really outlines what the promises were by the investment group, coupled with what the reality was that this was a Rhode Island, that it was a Rhode Island deal. They knew what they were doing. They picked it up on the cheap. They flipped it. They never made the investment. It plays into that cynicism Rhode Island.
It's like they're flipping a 3-decker.
Absolutely, a little Cranston land.
Toward the end of a boom,
a little Cranston land deal.
A land deal, It's like Governor Dupree's land deal, But I think what this says about the sociology of and the demographics, how we spend our time, spending that amount of time on an expensive sport is less attractive to people than it used to be. And the broader thing of clubs. A lot of clubs are having a terrible time keeping going. A lot of it's because the lunch business, which has declined. People who want to spend 2 hours at a lunch. And I have to say, an important adjunct of this is the decline in drinking at lunch, which goes way back to when, under Reagan and then Clinton, they cut back on the deductibility of drinks. These, you know, the 3 martini lunch that I used to enjoy with my little friends.
Is that what you guys did over at the Providence Journal?
Oh, this is in New York.
This is
in New York, right. And it was tolerated. I remember being taken by bosses to lunch, and they'd have 2 or 3 drinks at lunch, and then go back.
Were they affected because they drank so much?
Yeah, this is a great story. There's a man called John Cobb, who's the editor of Business Week. He could have tons of drinks. He'd share a bottle with his friend Pete French, and maybe and then go back and preside over this, the meeting of the editors, about 40 editors, and pull, you know, the Italian GDP and all that, be smoking his meerschaum pipe. The other guy went back to his office and slept. And then was poured on the train, you know, to Fairfield.
We're yearning for sleeping at night here at GoLocal.
That's right. No,
we don't have the luxury of 3 martini lunches. You've got a column this weekend. Let's give you a little overview.
Well, I think the almost the annual effort to raise taxes.
Right.
We have a lot of unmet needs and all that. You got to do it with Massachusetts. There's no option. You can't have substantially higher taxes in Massachusetts. I'm sorry, it may be unfair.
Right.
We have no choice.
Yeah. So our economy is so tied.
Yeah, you can't live in fantasy land.
Right.
Yeah, you can't do it.
I'll also push back a little on the proposal. You know, every budget season we have the governor and speaker and Marvin Abney and Mike DeBiase used to come in. Yeah. And all 4 of them would say the same thing. By the way, they're all Democrats.
Yeah.
We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem.
We have, I think in terms of public perception, I think we have a sense that there's a lot of spending, but the services aren't very good. If you're in Minnesota, which has high taxes generally, you have the sense the services are good. So politically here, the problem is the services don't seem very good, both municipally and statewide. You know, I know that we're working on fixing the transportation infrastructure. I give the governor quite a bit of credit for that, but the schools are generally mediocre.
Right.
And certainly municipally, I'll show you the road in front of my house. It looks like Lagos after a monsoon. So you've got that problem.
I've been to Minnesota. Yeah. In Minnesota towns, they have community recreational centers that are like acres big.
I know.
That have walking
indoor
tracks.
Swimming pools, indoor tennis courts. I'm half from Minnesota,
it's unbelievable.
It's pretty high taxes, but they get their money's worth.
But their lousiest one is nicer than anything we've even contemplated.
I know.
It's unbelievable.
It's just crazy. So every year we have this conversation. They just can't do it. They have to shut this up. You know, I've even had doubts over the years whether Rhode Island should exist as a separate state. As you know,
I think issue the RFP. See what Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York might. Fisher's Island, so close to Block
Island.
They might want to make a bid on it. Governor Cuomo might want to say, "Listen, it's better than Greenland."
It'd be like Metacomet.
Yeah, right.
Maybe a bunch of New York developers could buy. Well, they could buy Block Island.
Yeah, that's right. Sell it off in pieces.
So anyway,
we talk about the stock market. We were talking about it off. I think collectively around 13%. One of the most vulnerable corporate sectors is the newspaper industry.
Right.
This week, 2 bad things happened for the new Gannett, which is just a couple months old.
Which, by the way, we should explain to people is private equity money.
Is private equity.
We all talk about Gannett, the name of these. Behind it is Wall Street.
Right. They own the Providence Journal and a couple hundred other daily newspapers, the largest newspaper group the country has ever known.
That's right.
Hearst would be drooling.
Josh, in the old days, the antitrust division would have not permitted this. But the industry's dying, so they look the other way.
So that stock has just plummeted. It's gone from a 52-week high of about $13, a little more than 13, down to $4 and something cents.
It's heading toward penny stock territory.
It is in.
It's sad.
This, I think there's always been a sense that, we'll see this decline of the newspaper industry. We may now be seeing a precipitous that it just doesn't exist. And who would buy it?
Well, it's like Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner, and Warren Buffett, both of whom, by the way, have great affection for the newspaper business. They love them. They've owned them, but They see the reality. I think tragically, and even though I'm not in that particular medium now, I'd shed a few tears. Tragically, the next recession, which could happen this year, not just because of the coronavirus, there are other things, the debt and so on. This could just kill the whole thing off, almost the whole industry off in the matter of 6 months to a year. You could see a really implosion, that's some sort of black hole. I hope not, by the way, because the more variety, the better in media. But
we've talked to two interesting people about the presidential election. Let me go to both. Tad Devine, we spoke to on Sunday.
Very smart guy, even though he's kept working for loosers. So. So maybe it's not that.
He's had some unfortunate
unfortunate choices.
And,
not all of it under his control.
And Val Endress over at Rhode Island College, who's as delightful and smart as can be. Both of them point to, listen, we're inches away from Bernie Sanders being unstoppable towards being certainly.
We have this conversation next week. It might be all over.
Yeah. And what does that mean? What then lays out for a potential presidential race? I mean, could you have more two distinct? Is this Goldwater and
they're both populist, though. They're both of different sorts. I don't totally devalue the idea of Bernie actually winning. It could happen.
Especially in a
down economy, especially in a down economy. I think he could take Pennsylvania back, Michigan maybe. The other thing would be very important. We'll all be talking about this later next week. Who's the vice presidential candidate? We know it has to be somebody younger.
Right.
So would he pick? He wouldn't. I don't think he'd pick Buttigieg. He might pick what's her name? Klobuchar. Yeah. Who's sort of moderate, Truman. A Truman Democrat. When I morphed from a moderate Republican to a Democrat, it was really a Truman Democrat, not Bernie. So I think we're all going to be talking about that, and he's got to be very pragmatic and realistic about that.
Is Bloomberg done? He's had two terrible debates.
Yeah, I just don't see it, and I think they're going to be going to him and saying, look, if you want to keep Trump out, just give as much money as you can to the Democrats.
Right.
And, take back the Senate or something. Even if Trump reelected, if the Democrats take back the Senate, then they can control them. They can play.
The Wall Street Journal had late yesterday that Bloomberg had reached out and tried to recruit Andrew Yang as his vice presidential candidate to sort of reset the shuffle.
Well, they're both kind of techies, too.
Yeah,
everybody forgets that Bloomberg was trained as an electronical engineer. He went to Hopkins.
Right.
And they have something in common. Yeah, and of course the Yang is a person of color, Chinese background.
And also
kind of charming too.
Charming.
Yeah, which Mike is not particularly charming.
That would level.
He could lower the room temperature by 30 degrees.
Andrew Yang being a Brown grad would
be good for us.
Right.
Good for publicity. Yeah, that's an idea. And he knows business, economics, and I think he's onto something. Well, these jobs going to be lost by AI. Cashier, you saw the Amazon's latest thing.
The Amazon supermarket.
I can't even. Cashier-less
virtually
grocery store.
Unstaffed.
Right. You go into a store, you hold it up and walk out.
Right.
There's nobody at the door.
Right.
Yeah. So this is pretty creepy. Yeah.
And that will expedite in a down economy.
Yeah.
That adaption of that type of technology, Stop and Shop, if they're falling behind Whole Foods, and Whole Foods.
And remember, it's a small margin business, a volume business. So if things start to take a slide, especially at the higher end place like Whole Foods, you can see them all over the place.
Right.
And remember, this technology exists. This stuff could be implemented in Providence. Providence has 2 Whole Foods. Which I like the old name better, like the Bread and Circus, much better. There's one in Cranston, in Garden City.
Garden City.
I mean, they could move very fast. Their margins get squeezed anymore.
Well, and the other thing that takes place in a down economy is people start. You see them. You don't see them now. They start looking at labels, right? How many ounces is this? What's the unit price?
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. I already know. What are the ingredients?
Right.
Are they charging me 3 times more than I have to pay for the same ingredients?
Right.
Yeah. And people, even well-off people, upper middle class people start looking at that.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
The last major item in the news cycle, although this has been a quieter week, is the grand jury sitting on the relationship between Speaker Mattiello's office in the Providence, in the Rhode Island Convention Center Authority. we know that some people went before the grand jury.
Right.
We have a good indication they certainly were in the some have admitted, I think, that they went before the grand jury.
Even though they aren't supposed to, I don't
Well,
think.
they're allowed to.
They're allowed to. I never knew that. I was once
cannot.
approached about being on a grand jury, luckily because of my somewhat public job. That was not a great idea, but I was informed, perhaps erroneously by a clerk, that I aren't supposed to tell anybody.
No, you can walk out and have a press conference.
Really?
On
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Where are we with Nick Mattiello as the Speaker of the House? I
think he's in his last term. I think he's last term. Yeah. I think it's sort of like the business of business cycles. I think he's gone through his cycle. I don't think he's going to be indicted. I'd be very surprised.
Fenton Fung was here
who's a
yesterday.
friend of mine.
Yeah.
I'm not. I can't take
She
a public role.
disclosed that you were at Alan Fung's
that is correct.
Birthday
wild party too. Very loud, very wild. Yeah. Out of state, carefully out of state.
Did it have a theme?
The theme was beer.
Beer.
Right. Oh, it's a popular theme, and greasy food.
And greasy food.
That's right.
She's a very articulate, very high energy. Yeah. She's going to win a lot.
She's funny too. She's got a sense of humor.
Self-deprecating.
Yeah.
She's going to win a lot of votes at the door that Steve Frias might not have.
I agree. Steve is a little dour.
That is maybe the most optimistic thing that anyone has ever described. Steve Frias.
A little dark. Yeah. Right.
Does Nick Mattiello, faced with potentially not being Speaker again, having to face a summer? Listen, for anyone who has run for office, walking July, August, September, October, and
door to
door, hours at a time.
Yeah.
No one is glad to see you.
No.
There's never.
They all have other things to do.
Yeah, that's right. I'm cooking. I have to go pick up the kids.
Right.
Whatever it is.
Right. I'm selling all my stock. I'm on the phone with my broker. I'm selling everything.
I'm not very happy to begin with. Does he then rethink and enjoy
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's a reasonable guy. Yeah. I think he's got this young, dynamic person who would get some Democratic votes. I mean, she is, I think, anti-abortion, basically anti-abortion. I think she'll probably play that down and come across a moderate, because I actually think she is a moderate.
Well, and the other thing
I think a lot of ways she's a chafy Republican in many ways. Yeah.
Also add this, if you're a progressive Democrat and she's running and you want to change the dynamics at the State House, you might vote for her to get rid of him.
That's right.
So that creates some complexities there as well.
Because he's positioned himself as basically anti-abortion.
Yeah.
I mean, in a kind of modified. He's a very careful guy. But she's got the person, I think some people vote for her just for the show, too.
Right.
She's very entertaining.
Yeah.
And Speaker Mattiello is many things, but not entertaining.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a fascinating and a lot of fun race. My hunch is she may just pull out and say, this will be my last term, and go off and do something else.
Yeah, listen, he's a successful attorney. He's,
yeah.
Can always be a lobbyist.
And I don't think, despite all these controversies that never end around all House speakers, he done not a bad job. I think he understands some of the tax issues that you and I have talked about over the years. Competitive state economy and all that. I think he's done more good than harm, frankly. But she's dynamic. She's got lots of ideas, and
she'll raise some money. She'll raise some money to be competitive.
Yeah.
Listen, Bob, thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. We're going to take a quick break, and Ray Rickman will be in the house for his weekly video editorial. Thanks everybody. We'll be right back.